Kok gue nggak bisa masuk sih videonya? Bisa.
Selamat siang, Pak Medril.
Selamat siang, Pak Fitri. Saya tuh nggak bisa masuk. Ya, udah bisa.
Dah.
Tadi masih di hold.
Ya, saya tutup dulu.
Ya. Ada misi ini paling aneh. Iya, mau. Kamu Dimas disuruh ngeperan, mau. Kamu Dimas harus ngeperan dan kill musuh. Kamu tahu artinya? Artinya peran?
Aprat di mute dulu. Pak Medril, gimana kabarnya, Pak Medril?
Alhamdulillah baik, Pak Joko.
Alhamdulillah bisa ini join, sudah lama nggak ketemu.
Ya lama nggak masuk nih.
Mungkin next akan ada yang terkait adaptasi ya, mudah-mudahan masih bisa gabung lagi.
Kenapa?
Next webinar terkait adaptasi.
Insya Allah sepanjang waktu.
Kali ya, yang apa? Concernnya Pak Medril terkait apa alat ukur untuk ini apa to finance adaptation itu seperti apa ini menggunakan
Ya.
alat ukur apa?
Kita udah melangkah jauh sekarang, Pak Joko. Sampai mulai mendefine adaptasi itu bagaimana, sampai mengukurnya. Sekarang ke sana, tapi nggak ada yang melakukan itu sih. Yang lain-lain.
Saya sapa Pak Karsten. Good morning, Karsten.
Good morning. Good to see all of you.
Yeah, I would like to introduce you to Pak Medril from the Bappenas Ministry of Planning. Pak Medril, from IW. Yeah. So we have 3 economists right now. Prof. Karsten, Prof. Pradono, and Pak Medril himself.
It's frightening.
Okay. I don't know. Dimas, you want to start? Not yet. I don't know if Ian will join later.
Sorry.
All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the first Climate Policy and Finance Talk hosted by the Climate Change Center of Institut Teknologi Bandung, titled How to Structure Green Stimulus Packages After the COVID-19 Crisis and Which Role Can International Climate Finance Play? My name is Dimas Aninito and I would like to give you the role for this webinar. All right, so the first rule would be please rename the username into name_institution when joining the Zoom room. Second, the participants are requested not to activate the microphone feature or please turn on the mute mode during the webinar. And then during the webinar, participants can ask the panelists by using the Q&A box with the format name_institution followed by the questions. The questions from the participants will be read out after the questions from the discussion have been answered by the panelists. The next one would be the moderators have full rights to manage the webinar, and then please fill in the attendance form that we share via the chat box. The webinar materials link will be shared after the webinar is finished via email to participants who have registered and filled out the attendance form. And then we will send the certificate no later than 1 week after the webinar by email. Only participants who register and fill out the attendance form will get the certificates. Well, now I would like to tell you the overall rundown of this webinar. So the first activity will be the opening speech from Professor Joko Soroso, from Institut Teknologi Bandung, followed by the presentation from our panelists. The discussion follows, and then the closing remarks and photo session will conclude this event. All right, now I would like to invite Professor Joko Suroso to lead the main activities.
Start, no?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, allow me to share the screen. And yeah. This one. Okay. That's first of all, I'd like to thanks everybody for joining the webinar. Alhamdulillah, thanks to Allah that our planned webinar can be conducted now. Secondly, I would like to thanks very much Professor Carsten Nieuwhof and Mr. Heiner von Lucke from the IEW, German Institute for Economic Research, and then Dr. Edril Jam from Ministry of Planning, is the Director for Environment, and then Ibu Dian Lestari, MA, Head of Climate Change Finance of Ministry of Finance. But I don't know, probably he will join later, but I can see Dr. Nur Saifuddin from Ministry of Finance already joined. And then also I would like to thank Professor Pradono and Dr. Budi Setiawan from our center. All distinguished participants, I can see currently around more than 100 join this seminar. As planned, today we will have an online seminar with the topic of how to structure green stimulus package after the COVID-19 crisis and which role can international climate finance play. So I would like to start with the context of this climate policy and finance talks. Number one, I put number one because this series of talk will be continued. The second will be discussing about adaptation, because in the second year of this research consortium, we will start to focus as well to adaptation. And then the talk number three will be about the NDC for energy governance. From the screen, we can see that Climate Change Center of ITB is actually part of the International Research Consortium together with German, Indonesia, India, South Africa, and Brazil. The consortium is led by the IEW, especially by Professor Carsten Nieuwhof. This project aim is to spot the implementation of NDC in consortium countries, Brazil, India, Indonesia, and South Africa, and have two objectives. The first one is developing policy and financial instrument. And then the second, structuring climate financing to support robust institutional framework and policy. The expected impact in the right screen, basically, we want to facilitate the relevant line ministries to achieve the NDC target, like Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy, as well as I think also Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Planning. Basically, there are two focus of this project, what so-called country study and cross-country. For the country study, we select NDC governance in energy sector as a case study, and then for the cross-country study, which is comparative learning of international climate finance role, we choose, later I can show you, to study in detail green sukuk and RADD. Basically, there are two what type of output, short-term and long-term. The short-term, the policy advice, we try to address the immediate need. We often ask when we did the interview, what could be the benefit of this research to Indonesian institution, something like this. So the first one, we also will have output on policy advice, and then for the long-term one, we will have a model on NDC governance as well as innovative international climate finance scheme. This is this year is actually the second year. The project started last year. Yeah. However, we experienced the current pandemic. Of course, to some extent, influence the progress. But then we try to to also accommodate the current threat from global pandemic into our study. Basically, we have already published two reports, country study and cross-country study. For the country study, that's the roadmap until 2023. And then for the cross-country, just take an example from South Africa. There is best practices of Serie and Adaptation Fund program, which reach well into rural population. India bring the case of India's green energy corridor. And then Brazil also bring the case of Amazon Fund. This is to show you summary of the result of the country study, which they try to link with the need of finance or finance need. I want to focus in the bulk of issue in Indonesia energy sector. There are three basically called dilemma: weak policy framework to support renewable energy investment, and then lack of transparency and coordination. For the coal dilemma, basically, it is cheaper to buy coal-based electricity. Also, there is monopoly of state-owned company for electricity, PLN, and so on. For the pricing policy, we found that it is not attractive enough to support the renewable energy investment. And then for the result and finding, I would like to emphasize or highlight that the amount of public climate financial flows is fairly small and limited. This is according to Haliman Jaya, account for only around 10% of overall public flows. And then for the renewable energy pricing policy, Indonesian RE landscape as the regulation didn't solve the renewable bankability issues, such as renewable tariff and so on. Also, renewable energy investment are perceived as unchanged by the investor, and this increase the difficulty in closing the deal for renewable energy project. There are three challenges in the current future. So, in order to address the coal dilemma, on one hand, we have plenty resources of coal, meaning that it influences growth, influence job, etc. But as we know that coal has high emission, so we have to address that with the term so-called bridging fuel. This is the term proposed by Professor Purnomo Yusgiantoro, our former energy minister, which consists of natural gas and greener technology of coal. And then development of renewable energy requires strong legal framework. And then we also have to achieve the goal at once, fulfilling domestic energy, achieve NDC target, and also to consider our energy sovereignty, because Indonesia has plenty of variety of energy source, like geothermal, for example, which is still underutilized. And then we also has a vertical and horizontal in climate change and energy governance. This slide just to show that the funding available for achieving NDC target in energy sector is insufficient. So we still need more additional funding to achieve NDC target in energy sector. This highlight the link between our result of country study with the cross country, meaning that how can international climate finance address this, closing the gap of this. For the cross-country study, as I said before, we study in detail Green Sukuk and REDD+. Green Sukuk, the finding is that Green Sukuk is able to present as a window to finance implementation of the plan program based on the technical assistance. And then international climate finance plays a role to propose the program as a result of the technical assistance, for example, and developing climate budget taking framework to be used for Green Sukuk financing. So able to use Green Sukuk mechanism, Green Sukuk scheme, because there is certain investment need identified by technical assistance, usually use international climate finance. So that is why, to conclude, international climate finance in Green Sukuk case provide the identification of specific domestic need and provide an innovative scheme to finance those needs. For the REDD, yeah, basically RUDD scheme could trigger new policies like one map policy, moratorium, etc., as well as based on result-based payment. Recently, we heard that already Norway has already paid 1 billion US after the assessment of Indonesia's high performance as an effective way of financing mechanism. So I now enter to the link into our current webinar, which is try to discuss what kind of green recovery type can be implemented for Indonesian economic recovery. I start with the fact with the presentation published by Vivid Economic 2020. Vivid Economic use what so-called Green Stimulus Index, meaning assess the effectiveness of COVID-19 stimulus in ensuring an economic recovery that take advantage of sustainable growth opportunities and build resilience. So, yeah, this index assess how green actually the stimulus package launched by every country. There are 17 countries in the right side. USA already announced highest package, almost 3 trillion, yeah, almost 3 trillion, 2.98. The total of this 17 is about 11.8 trillion US dollar, and from the study is stated that United States, for example, stand out as the largest scale risk. This one, if we look to the right screen, this is the position of every country studied in the Green Stimulus Index from the positive into the negative. Yeah, in Indonesia, in terms of package, I think the third lowest package among this 17, and also in relation to the Green Stimulus Index, it is considered as a bronze package, bronze stimulus package in here in Indonesia. Countries which are considered as green, as the positive index, Germany, UK, France, and South Korea. This is something interested to study. For example, France and Canada successfully attached green condition to bail out environmentally intensive industries, and then Germany's latest stimulus package include package for the future with around 45 billion to support green transition. And then South Korea non-substantial funding they call as for green project through its New Deal. Green project through its New Deal, especially for renewable energy and energy efficient in over the next 5 years. This slide to show that basically based on the data of COVID incident in August show a dramatic increase. From this figure, we can conclude that basically the future of this COVID is still uncertain. So we don't know yet when this will end. This is the data, and then from the left screen, we also can see the Indonesian climate change budget performance from 2016 to 2020 basically increase but then decrease from 29 up to 2020. So this the latest slide I got. Basically, this seminar would like to ask several questions as follows from the planning context. How will the government of Indonesia seek the opportunity of green activities to be used for economic recovery and so on. And then for the fiscal policy, equilibrium of economic recovery and climate change financing after COVID-19, there are two questions. What kind of financial instrument needed to fund the NDC target? Is there any innovative financial mechanism from the international climate finance? So I conclude with the main question, basically to ask to question to what extent Indonesia could take this current risk of global pandemic to be used as an opportunity for greening economic recovery. As we know that based on law number 2/2020 and then implemented by government regulation 23 amended by 43/2020, we have what so-called economic recovery plan. So we can judge here how green is the package and whether we could use it as an opportunity to pursue green recovery. This, I think, Pak Medril probably answered that yes, can be using low carbon development initiative, and he also several times mentioned about building back better. So yeah, Pak Medril could clarify this later. Later also we can have a perspective from international from Professor Carsten Newhoff. I stop here and I will introduce Professor Pradono, one of the researchers in this project. Yeah, he is also, as I said before, an economist. Prof. Pradono, I give you the time. Thanks.
Thanks, Professor Joko. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Pradono, as has been introduced by Professor Joko at ITB, and I will chair for this next webinar for about 2 hours. As has been mentioned by Professor Joko, that there is a big question. How will we deal with climate change policy, mainly after COVID-19 pandemic? And this is bringing us to a big question, because yeah, you know, every country mainly suffered from the pandemic, and for especially Indonesia, with the limited budget and constraint, then we should or we face either will we succeed and proceed with what we have committed to the climate change policy, or should we make some adjustments? So with this big question, next presentation and discussion, we will have 5 prominent persons to discuss this topic. And we have first Professor Carsten Neuhoff from Germany. Is the Climate Policy Department in the German Institute for Economic Research, EIW, and he's also the professor at the Institute for Economics and Law Technical University. The second one, we have Dr. Mitrizam. Yes, the director of the environment in the Ministry of National Planning, Republic of Indonesia. And the third one, we have Dr. Dian Lestari, the head of the Center for Climate Finance and Multilateral Policy. Indonesia. Dr. Already graduated from the World Center program. The Heiner von Lipke, Research Associate, Climate Policy Department, EW Berlin. The second one, Dr. Stua, on climate finance from Climate Change Center IDB. So for those speakers, we have allocated 1 hour, and then another 1 hour will be the discussion. So the first, I would like to invite our guest from Germany, Professor Carsten, to give his overview or maybe experience linked with the issue just mentioned, maybe experience from Europe, that will give us perspectives on how we will deal with the issue. So for Professor Carsten, you have 20 minutes. So I offer chance for you, and I will give you a quick reminder, maybe 3 minutes before the time is up for you. Please, Professor Carsten.
Good morning, and thanks so very much for the invitation to this prestigious panel here. I guess perhaps one of the very few positive impacts of COVID is that we are suddenly talking a lot more to each other on long distances. I think otherwise we would not have been sitting together here. But then again, I think the topic is a really tough one for many people in our country. So let's try to find ways of learning from each other. I think as Joko characterized our project, we jointly try to kind of reflect on national experiences and learn from each other. And so I took your invite as an opportunity to reflect a little bit on the experience in Germany and in Europe to see if there are perhaps some elements that might be helpful for you, but I'm very happy that I can also kind of learn from your discussions and already learned a lot on governance from Joko in this project so far. So luckily we don't only have economists in this overall project. Let me try. I brought along 7 slides, so let me try whether I can present them. You probably see the wrong slide. Do you see the full screen or the partial screen now?
Yes.
Good.
Partial.
Partial still. Sorry. What was?
Yeah, that one.
Now it's all dark. No. Sorry for this. I'm still unprofessional in this context.
Probably display setting.
Yes.
Yes, that's true.
That's better. Okay. So I think at the beginning of the crisis, in March or so, when it started to become difficult, we started a review in terms of what can be learned from previous crises, in particular the financial crisis 2008 and 2009, and the corresponding recovery packages. And if you look at this slide, you can see that already at that time, as Joko just showed, this time around, the US had a rather big program, but also reflecting, I think, the overall scale of the US economy. What I think was interesting, if you looked at the green components, and it's difficult to label them precisely, that were part of the different packages at that time. And then to reflect on, was it successful in terms of the green components? Did they help to achieve the overall recovery objectives, securing jobs, getting the economy moving again into the longer term? And for me, one of the strongest insights from this looking back was that if recovery funding was aligned with funding activities that had a long-term vision, then private actors kind of used this funding to take forward new investments, new activities. And I think that implied most of the time that the funding, which was often cash, had to be aligned with policy objectives that were decided at the local or national level, such that actors realized, okay, we can use this money now and make an investment into the longer term. And I think then the leverage of using public money to really achieve an objective was relatively high in these instances. I think if you look at this old paper by Douglas et al., they pointed out 3 core components for recovery packages: targeted, timely, and temporary. And I think we add one further now, which one can deduce from this, which is transformative. Recovery funding needs to be targeted because at the end, one puts public money into a space where private actors are always happy to take public money, but you don't want them just to kind of save this money to pay it back to the shareholders, but you want to encourage additional activities. Otherwise, the public money won't have any effect from the recovery packages. And the more an activity is targeted, the more you can target it to activities that otherwise would not have happened. And that makes then the really recovery package effective. Timely, I think obviously is, we are running into the crisis now, the global level, at the European level, and I don't know too much about the Indonesian situation, but I think it's probably not too dissimilar. And therefore, the issue was, how can you find activities that are quick to implement, shovel-ready projects that are on the ground? And in this context, I think climate, again, was an interesting element because a lot of climate activities have been decided or kind of structured and thought through now for a decade. What can we do to shift towards climate neutrality, towards emission reductions? What kind of projects are there? So there's a lot of preparation that has happened, at least in Europe, and preparation where effectively plans are ready now and companies have said, hey, we could do this and that if we would have the policy framework, if we would have the cash. And this makes actually a green component a relatively attractive component for a recovery package because people already thought through what kind of activities one should do to become green, and therefore makes these activities more shovel ready. Temporary is another dimension. Governments inherently kind of are budget constraints. And so if one runs into a recovery package and starts to build up new programs that will commit governments for a long funding row over many, many years to come, that kind of really is tough for our public budgets and not really credible to private actors that we really can follow through because we all are budget constraints in our countries. So finding opportunities where recovery funding can be temporary was quite an important component. And this, I think, is for me intriguing, that a transformation means we have to catalyze investment, we have to catalyze activities, we have to kickstart activities for a shift, for example, to renewable energy or to energy efficiency or to a circular economy. So we need to kind of put money on the table at the beginning, but in the longer term, these activities become self-sustaining because they are in many ways economic once you've got used to doing them. And so a green component can be quite suitable by being temporary. So altogether, I think the intriguing part really looking back at the experience from 2008-9 is that targeted, timely and temporary are aspects of a successful recovery package, which are particularly well addressed if we finance or support transformative activities towards climate neutrality in our countries. And therefore, they have become quite attractive for the design of recovery packages. And this is what you can see if you now look at the German package. So the German package decided in June this year has a total volume of 130 billion euro. There are a set of dimensions that are covered. We obviously had to kind of support, there was a strong component of kind of temporary relief for workers. There was a strong component for a culture. There was a value-added tax reduction of 20 billion. But there's also 50 billion out of the 130 billion investments towards climate neutrality. And I think you can see the list here summarized by Bloomberg in this instance. So that illustrates how the German government and the policy debate internally realized for the recovery package, we have very targeted activities that will be additional, that would otherwise not happen if we fund, for example, the hydrogen economy or shift to electric vehicles or new railway infrastructure, electric vehicle charging aspects, more public transport or building renovation. That will be additional because otherwise, without this funding, it would not happen in the next years at that scale. It will be timely because there have been plans around this to do it, which just have not really materialized strong enough. And obviously there's a lot of work now with governments in Germany and European level to make these plans tangible and implement them. And it's temporary because these activities will kickstart the transformation to climate neutrality, but will not depend on large-scale public funding in the years to come. In Europe, we started every country looking at for itself in the Corona crisis. It went to this horrible situation that our partner country, Italy, we have a lot of strong ties between the countries. When the Corona crisis hit Italy toughest at the beginning in Europe, what did we do? We kind of stopped commuting between countries, but we even stopped to provide some of the medical supplies to Italy at that time. So there was really a response of all countries kind of to freezing and kind of just looking for themselves, which really was a situation where countries across Europe were worried that we would fall apart as a European Union into individual member states. Everyone kind of looked at this and said, what did we do? And so there was actually a very strong rebound effect in the way that countries across Europe realized actually on our own, we all are lost. We have to kind of find ways of coming back together. And so the first thing was the credit lines that were kind of issued from the European Investment Bank, a recovery to kind of secure the financing of countries across Europe in this crisis mode. This is roughly this 550 billion euro on short-term response measures. On the global level, that's I think what the World Bank has been and IMF have been working on with a lot of countries to help them to secure short-term liquidity. And then we had tough negotiation leading up to a 5-day council meeting of the presidents of the European countries in July to decide and agree upon a recovery plan for Europe, which is now including additional 750 billion euro, which Europe is raising as loans. It's the first time that the European Commission can raise loans from the market secured by the member states that will be then paid back over 50 years. And that money is used to fund the recovery plan for European member states. It's a very new approach in Europe. So far, we had the fiscal autonomy of member states, and roughly 1% of GDP would go to Europe and would then be reallocated for certain activities. This is the multi-annual financial framework, which also was decided for the next 7 years in Brussels in July of this year. For 7 years, it's a 1.1 billion euro budget at the European level. So that is also, all of that had been now decided in July. The final votes will be in the European Parliament and by the member states again in October and November to kind of sign up all of this that has been agreed on a political level. But now I think it's more of a fine-tuning issue. I think what is interesting around all of this is how will it be allocated now and how will it be used? The majority of particularly the European funding always has been going back to member states. And that is to member states for agricultural policy, for regional policy, for research policy in the different areas, and only a small fraction is directly allocated at the European level. And this is also the case with the recovery package, the 750 billion euro. Roughly 650 billion euro out of the 750 billion euro will directly go to member states, and member states will then have to effectively provide national recovery and resilience plans where they outline what they want to do with their share of the recovery package at the member state level. So every country has to kind of show what is it going to do over the next 2 or 3 years with this money, and show particularly how the funding will contribute to acquiring, to supporting the green and the digital transition. The way to kind of secure that this is additional activities that will be taken forward. So coming back to this targeted policy objective that I pointed out earlier on. The plans will then go to the European Commission, which reviews and comments upon these plans. And then European member states come together and all of them vote together on each of the plans. Is it appropriate to kind of fund this plan according to this line? So countries come together to kind of commit that they actually do what they jointly wanted to do with these plans. For the plans, there's the overall objective to spend roughly 30% of this recovery funding, but also on the multi-annual financial funding for spending on climate and climate-related activities. And this is not just the typical OECD earmarking, which sometimes is a bit weak, but it's making sure that it is aligned with the priority axis of how the programs are designed at the member state level. And as part of this project, Sasha Novikova was leading a study on understanding how the EU budget has been working in the past. So if you're interested in this process, there's this European study from the first year that kind of goes into a lot more detail. What is the experience of these kind of processes from the past? I think it's very interesting because if you look at what has been now implemented at the European level, was very much guided by the Paris Agreement and the way the Paris Agreement is structuring nationally determined contributions that I outline what is going to be done. And that is a governance element that we now copied at the European level to where we thought it is quite a suitable approach to kind of reflect it that member states support their national recovery and the resilience plans, provide them, get comments for them, and then implement autonomously the policies and the strategies to achieve that. An additional criteria is that has been agreed by the head of states that all expenditure across, also beyond this 30%, should be aligned or consistent with the Paris Agreement objectives. And there's a bit of debate going on now. How can we secure these objectives? As part of the EU Sustainable Finance Agenda, a taxonomy was developed already to identify different activities and to test whether they are aligned with the Paris goals. And it's considered right now whether this taxonomy could be a starting point for such an assessment. But also I think there are discussions in terms of whether one wants to go beyond this to go to sustainable development goals or other aspects. We can discuss this in more detail if you want to. So I think I started out this discussion illustrating that the experience from 2008 and 2009 was that recovery programs were particularly successful if it was not just cash that was burned quickly, but cash that had a vision for companies. And that means it was aligned with also a long-term policy objective, policy target, policy framework. And this is just from a press release of the European Commission, which when they announced the overall proposal from their side, and they said they want to go for a massive renovation of our buildings and going to more circular economy to create local jobs across all countries in Europe. Unemployment is one of our biggest concerns at the European level, and addressing unemployment is one of the key elements, also one of the key elements of structuring now how countries, which countries get more funding to address their unemployment with these projects. The second dimension is rolling out renewable energy projects. Wind, solar are particularly pronounced there because they are seen as the key component of European energy basis for the future, because they are available in larger scale compared to other activities. And one of the big tough parts here is that if you don't use solar, but if you want to use biomass, you need 20 to 50 times more space to create the same amount of energy as if you kind of use solar farms to kind of harvest this. And then the question is, how can you align solar farms with co-aligning this with using the soil for agricultural activities in parallel, which seems to be possible. Obviously, there's a big component of transport involved in it. And then we have started to structure now European funds, for example, the Just Transition Fund at the scale of 10 billion to help regions in Europe where there's a concern that, for example, conventional steel making will have to shift to clean steel making to make sure that the same companies in the same area can continue to operate, that jobs where some activities will not change, people will have retraining, reskilling to make sure that they can be part of a winning strategy into the future. Let me illustrate these at two examples in a bit more detail. For example, I'm looking at the circular economy. As part of this recovery work, we interviewed about 30 of the main companies across Europe to understand what would you do if our governments, which we subsequently did, puts cash on the table to support investments into circularity, into climate neutrality. And we were looking at different sectors and then asking, what kind of projects do you think you could take forward as part of a recovery strategy? For me, it was intriguing to kind of have this new setting of asking questions. In the past, we always ask questions, what is the first time that you can kind of deliver clean energy? When is the first time that you can deliver clean steel? When is the first time that you can make circular elements successful? And every company says, yeah, we can do this, but it takes a lot of cash and takes a lot of time. That's an inherent response because you don't want to commit yourself as a company too early. Now we are in a situation that it's credible that governments want to stimulate the economy now, want to put cash on the table now to support activities, but it will be tough. It's a lot of more spending now, so public budgets will be stretched and we will not be able to fund so much in the future. And suddenly, all the companies were changing their response to interviews amongst trusted friends and to their internal strategy and to the public communication even, identifying what activities they can more quickly implement because now there is cash available to do something that otherwise they might not be able to do in the future. And that is what you can see here in terms of new investments that companies think they could take forward very quickly on clean steel production, on clean cement production, on clean chemical production. What was interesting is that...
Last 3 minutes for you.
3 minutes, okay, I'll be there. The interesting part for me was that a lot of the elements were linked to enhancing sorting of materials, enhancing recycling of materials. So really the circular elements, which were also attractive seen in Europe because they make our supply chains more resilient. We don't have to import oil from the world if you can recycle plastic. And that then also has a big long-term economic benefit for our countries. And final slide on this. For the renewable side, we have spent a lot of money in Europe for building PV and wind farms. And that was expensive in the past, which this picture illustrates. So the picture shows that we roughly spend 300 to 500 billion euro per year in Europe for fossil fuels and the related carbon emissions. In the past, if you go back to the year 2000, if you wanted to shift at that time to wind and solar, it would have been really expensive. And because wind and solar technologies were so expensive. Technology costs have come down a lot, such that today we can afford in Europe to shift to wind and solar energy because it's at the same scale of cost as it is for oil, gas, and coal-based power generation and energy use. The only requirement for this to happen is that in projects can be financed at modest capital cost of, let's say, 5% or so. If capital cost increases, then capital-intensive activities like wind or solar farms get more expensive. And so a lot of the work now is in Europe and in Germany, how can we make sure that we have attractive financing conditions, attractive investment frameworks to accelerate investments in wind and solar, to get more jobs through this additional investment towards a climate neutrality. And next week, the European Commission will announce their proposal in terms of how to strengthen our climate target for 2030, which currently is 40%, to somewhere between 50 and 55%, to make sure that there is perception of market participants that we need to invest in this and that this is a business opportunity for them. So let me summarize. Lessons from the previous crisis was recovery programs have to be timely, targeted, and temporary. Green activities are meeting all of these elements, which is quite attractive. And therefore, I think transformative activities towards climate neutrality in Germany and in Europe are seen to be an important component of the recovery package, reflecting 50 out of 130 billion euros of the recovery package in Germany, roughly a third of 30% of the funding at the European level of the 750 billion recovery package also is meant to kind of go to climate neutrality. The way that is achieved, supposed to be achieved, is through national recovery and resilience plans, which member states propose to say what is their priority, how do they think they best can use the money, which is reviewed at the European level to see whether this is really additional activity, whether this is achieving this. The European Commission comments on this. The member states amongst each other then vote, do we really support and think that that is what every country is doing in this context. So I think it is, for me, a very exciting opportunity to see whether the way the Paris Climate Agreement is structured does work, because we've implemented de facto something of the sort now at the European level. Thanks very much and looking forward to the discussion.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Preston. I think as we have been expected, we have some perspective and interesting overview of experience from Europe on how to deal with climate change after COVID-19. Okay, next we will have Dr. Medrezam from Bamenas. I think he will provide what is called the low carbon initiative, a strategy that be implemented in Indonesia, and he is the right person to discuss about it. How far is it being discussed, and the prospect, and how it will be implemented in Indonesia. So please welcome for the next 20 minutes, Dr. Medrezam. Please, Dr. Medrezam, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak Pradono. Please allow my staff to share the screen. Okay, thank you very much. Pak Joko, my long friend from ITB, Pak Karsten. Here I see Pak Heiner. How are you, Pak Heiner? It's a long time to see. And Bu Emma, I don't know whether Bu Emma is also joining here, but I see that there is a representative as well from a colleague from Ministry of Finance, Pak Nur here, and also Pak Budi, and also to everyone, greetings to everyone in Indonesia and around the globe. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is a very good time and a very good topic to discuss, about the green fiscal stimulus after the COVID-19. But of course, I have to say that it's a great pleasure for me to join you today. And first of all, I'd like to thank to Pak Joko from Center for Climate Change from ITB hosting for this such important event. I believe you have been aware that we're still committed to have an ambitious target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions up to 29%. Please, next slide, please. Okay. Yeah. And as you might be aware that we still have committed to reach about 29% unconditional and 41% conditional by 2030, and according to our greenhouse gas emissions reductions monitoring system and low carbon development, or we call it AXARA, that the potential emission reductions and emission intensity contributions by 2019, this is a cumulative number, has reached about 20.46 for emissions reductions and 20.7% for emission intensity reductions. And of course, these achievements show that our development is still on the right track to pursue the long-term target of low carbon development. And in our current RPGMN, or our planning document from 2020 to 2024, that this performance will be strengthened through what we call low carbon development initiative. Next slide. However, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic start from March 2020 here in Indonesia, and had already resulted in a very bad negative economic and social impacts. And in order to manage the impacts generated by COVID-19, our government has established various fiscal stimulus policy, which mostly focus on economic recovery and also to stabilize our COVID-19, the number of positive cases of COVID-19. And this kind of focus might result in environmental issues, I can say, being a bit ruled out, including effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, in particular in 2020. To be honest, in 2020, most of our budget allocations actually refocused to refocus to manage the impact of COVID-19. And it is predicted that in 2021, government of Indonesia performance to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will decline a bit because of the focus in a short-term response to strengthen economic, health, food, and disaster resilience. But we'll still commit to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 2024 in a level about 27% below the baseline in 2024. And this is still, we are still commit to pursue the 29% targets in 2020. And next slide, please. Of course, if you see here that the COVID-19 has changed the ways of the way we are living here and some of the Indonesian development policies. In 2020, most of development programs have been shifted, as I mentioned, and focused to health sector, social safety net, and also about economic stability. And most targets that have been stated in National Midterms Development Plan, in particular in 2020, cannot be accomplished due to this shifting of priority. And of course, this raised a lot of questions. It's like, how about the focus in a more long-term way instead of a short-term way? Is it enough just to focus only on economic and social recovery? Do we ever think about to maintain the momentum of our sustainable development goals, and also about the questions whether we still commit to achieve our ambitious targets in Paris Agreement? So that's why then, please next slide, we propose the concept of Build Back Better to respond our COVID-19 to respond to COVID-19 impact in Indonesia. We know that this Build Back Better concept is not a new concept. It's a concept actually taken from the what do you call it, what do you call it, disaster resilience conference, I forget the terms, but this is not a new concept. And actually Build Back Better is an after disaster recovery programs which aim at avoiding the reconstructions of the vulnerability that exists before the events. Basically, we would like to have a new state of resilience that could also anticipate future disasters that might be occurred, in particular disasters something like climate change and so on. And these recovery models, of course, we see that could help us to transform ourselves to be more resilient and also be able to manage risk better compared to our state prior to disasters. In terms of post-COVID-19 pandemic recovery, long-term economic stimulus must be built, must be designed as well to build a stronger economy that ensures a long-term health, job creations, to build stronger economy that ensures long-term health, and also building more resilient society. In this way, we could allocate our current spending better to tackle not only the current challenge, but also the challenge that we will eventually come to us. You know, when we talk about climate change, I think if we just talk about climate change in the current situations, I believe this is not a good thing to talk about, because you know many decision makers in our country still think that we have to tackle this COVID-19 recovery in a more immediate action, with immediate actions, with effective actions, efficient actions, and so on. But what I would like to say here, when we talk about climate change in this current situation, I think it will be better that we associate ourselves in how then climate change programs to climate change mitigations or adaptations programs could produce more jobs. So then we could associate and we could also support our decision makers to recover the jobs lost because of this crisis. So if we just talk about climate change, probably it's not sellable at the moment. But if we link our climate change programs with jobs, that will be a more interesting topics to be discussed in our decision makers discussions. And this is in line with our president's speech just a few weeks ago in our Independence Day, that he explained very clearly that we have to use this momentum of this pandemic to consolidate our plan and jump further ahead to accelerate and transform our business as usual to better development activity. And I believe this is still in line with applications of our Build Back Better principles that we are here in Bappenas keep pursuing ahead in conjunction with the implementation of our LCDI that has already been planned in the current RPGMN. And Build Back Better, of course, aim toward improving our resilience in response to future threats of the crisis. And although we have to do this in a more and smooth transitions process. If you can see in the slide that start from 2021, the government works plan, or we usually call RKP, annual or yearly development programs, that we start to revive the implementations of low carbon development through several measures. We have identified at least there are 9 major projects to support the implementations of low carbon development out of 42 strategic priority projects, or we usually call it major projects in 2021. We really hope those LCDI activities in 2021 could show the continuations of strong government willingness to implement low carbon development in Indonesia. To support our consolidation activity in LCDI, currently we are also in the process of identifying and mapping out the existing fund and programs on low carbon developments. And we are not only just to identify funding from program of line ministries, but also we try to identify some direct incentive subsidy tax that the government has already provided in relation to many activities related to LCDI, such as subsidy for public transport, geothermal, socioforestry, and so on and so forth. Actually, we believe in, we have a hypothesis in Bappenas. Actually, we have a lot of programs related to low carbon development, but they are all scattered. They are all in silos. So basically now we try to collect them all and then crafting them together and also synthesize them. And we aiming for 2022, we will start implementation, a full gear of LCDI. And we really expect that we could also develop a comprehensive stimulus package on low carbon economy that will be integrated into our annual development plan, and keep ensuring achievement of the target of our RPGMN 2020 to 2024, and also 2030 or Paris emission reduction targets. The government of Indonesia certainly cannot work alone. And also we cannot work in silo to tackle this pandemic and nourish green recovery platform. According to NDC partnership support that I have put here in the slides, at least there are 3 areas that can be supported by international climate finance. Namely about assessing macro impact of COVID-19 on climate ambitions. Actually, we have done that here in Indonesia. We have our own exercise for this. And The second one is adjusting costing for to revise or adjusting costing of revised NDCs, if any. And the most important one as well, we need to assess how stimulus package can trigger green growth in our country. Basically, we will align the Paris Agreement target with our green growth ambitious target as well. However, in this event, I'm stressing the need to assess how stimulus package can trigger green stimulus, and Indonesia need to use COVID-19 momentum to avoid existing vulnerability and also potential other vulnerability ahead. To close, I won't be very long. To close here, actually, we welcome future collaborations on low carbon development and climate resilience that is stronger, more strategic, and more sustainable. Thank you very much. I'll offer back to you again, Pak Pradono.
Thanks, Dr. Mitrisam, for interesting points about the low carbon development initiative through build together in Indonesia. And it's already given by Pak Mitrisam, interesting to be discussed later. So next we will have Dr. Dian Lestari. Ibu Dian is is head of the Center for Climate Finance and Multilateral Policy, the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. I think she will provide overview and perspective on how we will finance the climate change in Indonesia because after the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah. So we will welcome Ibu Dian Lestari for presenting your slides, and you have 20 minutes. 3 minutes before the time some I will remind you. Please welcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Very good afternoon to all of you. I think, I think I need to make some excuses before I start my pen. I was joining a bit late due to my area was experiencing power outage just now, and right 10 minutes before my turn to speak, it's suddenly on. So I can say that I was quite lucky on this. And my second maybe excuse or disclaimer is thank you, moderator, for your introduction that yes, I'm the director or the head of the climate finance and multilateral policy under the Fiscal Policy Agency, but to be precise, I'm an acting director, so it is a kind of a temporary position. My original position is director for regional and bilateral policy, still under the Fiscal Policy Agency. And then I just assumed my position for less than maybe 2 weeks, I believe. So I'm being an acting director for the climate finance. It doesn't mean that I'm an expert on this area. In fact, this is a really quite an area that quite new for me, but yeah, I've been familiar for some policy and for some terms, but not really that I'm an expert on. But then I already, so when Professor Joko reached out to me to ask to give the invitation to speak, I told him that I give it a thought. So I talked to my team. So we made a deal that I'll do the presentation, but then I'll bring my team with me. Is Pak Nur, he's my senior analyst. So I talked to Pak Nur that you should give me a backup for the Q&A, and he said yeah. So please understand if during the Q&A I will invite my team to also respond to any question raised. Okay, let me start with the presentation here. I'm going to cover about the climate finance in Indonesia. Next, please. So yeah, this is only the background, how we perceive, how we, how we understand about the climate change issue in Indonesia, and I believe you've been more, more knowledgeable about this more than myself. So I think I'm going to skip this slide. I think I'll start with the slide number 3. The next slide, please. The next slide, please. Yeah. Okay. Maybe Dr. Medrizal already covered about the government commitment on the climate change, but then I think more I'm trying to look at more into the fiscal aspect. So the government's commitment tackling climate change can be seen for a number of evidence here. First, that the fact that Indonesia has been actively participating at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference of Parties, or UNFCCC, as a global forum to control climate change. And then the government also so far has ratified a number of international agreements or policies into national regulation and action plans. And then our state budget also has been allocating funds for climate mitigation and adaptation action. And also our fiscal policy also support through a number of fiscal incentives. We also have set 2 ambitious agenda in 2030. Pak Medrizal also already touched on this, that we have set, the government has set 2 ambitious agenda related to climate change through the commitment to SDGs and also nationally determined contributions. And then we have targeted that by 2030, Indonesia will reduce the greenhouse emission at 29% with our own resources, or up to 41% with international support. The next. Okay, another commitment or evidence made by the government is on climate budget taking initiatives. As you can see, the journey has been started since 2012, where the Ministry of Finance has actively undertaken several policy studies in support of public funding for climate change that is used as the basis for climate change budgeting activities. In 2016, as an effort to increase transparency of public funding for climate change control in Indonesia, the government of Indonesia, through the Ministry of Finance, began to implement climate change budgeting, or we call it climate budget tagging, or CBT system in our state budget. Climate budget tagging is a process of making in planning documents to track and identify climate change budgets and outputs. The implementation of CBT is the result of collaboration between the Ministry of Finance, Bappenas, and the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and also engage a number of related ministries and institutions through the KRISNA system, or planning and budgeting system collaboration. The recent development is in 2020, the Fiscal Policy Agency under the Ministry of Finance has launched the Public Climate Finance Report for fiscal year 2016-2018, and we have also developed a regional climate budget taking. Now, I believe the next slide is covering about the current context of COVID-19 pandemic. And its impacts. The government has launched the so-called National Economic Recovery Policy Program, or we call it PAN. And we have allocated budget amounting to equal to 47.9 billion, include health sector stimulus. or without a health sector stimulus. The PAIN program aims primarily at restoring our demand and supply side through a stimulus package to address a health issue and recover the economy by advancing social protection, providing a business incentive, support for small, medium enterprises, corporate financing, as well as a number of programs funded through the line ministries and local. So this is the distribution of the budget allocation for each stimulus. And then this is really absorb the government financing capacity because we are, really have to reallocate and refocus our budget resources to, to address and pursue the economic recovery. Next, please. So we understand that the COVID-19 or the pandemic has not only given economic impact, but also environmental impact. It made a correction to the economic growth and reversed our development achievement in employment and poverty rates, as can be seen from the figure on the slide. But then it happened in not only, it's not specific or unique in Asia, but it happened in many in the world as well. But then this situation, on the other hand, as indicated by the World Meteorological Organization or WMO, has decreased the global emission pandemic due to the slow down economic activities. But yeah, of course, it might be only temporary because as the economic rebound, it would bring the increase of CO2 emissions back on the track. So how to, Rizal also already mentioned and discussed about this in his presentation. So how we should anticipate this situation. Next slide, please. Many suggest that the government even more consideration on implementing rules-based fiscal policy frameworks for climate-related activities, which establish and instruments that are transparent. As the fiscal authority, the Minister of Finance is urged to make the state budget greener by leveraging public funds to support climate-related projects initiatives. In this context, the Minister of Finance actually has been providing various forms of incentives, subsidy, and other fiscal instruments to encourage economic players in order to carry out climate-related activities. However, climate change-related projects require capital availability to broaden resources as well as the way in which they are intermediated. We understand now we are struggling to, reallocate our resources to, to target the economic recovery. And whether we can do it in a way or not. So fiscal policy agency in this context, we have identified a number of initiatives to develop. The next slide, please. To develop the CCFF with several objectives, as can be seen from the screen. This is the objective. Among other things is the budget policy framework and enabling environment for achieving the overall objective of climate fiscal policy. But then I think the points that we need to underline, I need to share with you today is the expected outputs. We are expecting this initiative, we are able to an assessment, identification of the demand and supply side of the climate fiscal funds for climate fund and their allocation to the concerned sectors, and identification of climate-related stress and additional expenditure requirement, as well as estimating potential cost of long-term financing needs to combat effects of climate change, and identification of financing gaps for delivering further sources of public sector financing investment and prevent supporting non-fiscal or NDC sectoral priorities policies. And next is identification of enabling environment for private financial flows and alternative blended financing mechanism for public and private fund for the concerned or NDC priority sector. And last but not least is a governance framework, including policy coordination mechanism, monitoring and evaluation system for climate change funds under the National Climate Change Fiscal Framework. That's what we are trying to, pursue or to achieve by, developing the initiative on the climate change fiscal framework. But currently, I may share, we are trying to conduct studies, the necessary studies to explore the possible adoption of the CCFF in our fiscal policy. So the next slide is about the climate finance instruments that we've been exploring this far. So we are aware of options we have on climate finance instruments from both national and international sources. On national front, there's some options from public sector. We've been allocating budget for climate mitigation and adaptation spending. We have issued Global Green Sukuk. We have established a public service agency, or we call it BLU, or Badan Layanan Umum, to manage environment fund, the so-called BPDLH. We have the SDG Indonesia one managed by PT SME and ICCTF. I believe Pak Rizal is very familiar with this. From private sector, we have option from private investment and philanthropy for green projects and programs, and we are developing sustainable finance in banking and other financial sector in coordination with our financial sector authority, or OJK. And the same goes in international front. We have we've been looking at options from a Green Climate Fund, Global Facility, and loan multilateral. At the same time, we are trying to attract private investors to by issuing some instruments like the green Global Green Sukuk and Green Sukuk Retail and other corporate financial instruments that we are trying to encourage our private sector to issue in the capital market. And then the next slide. Okay, over the past 5 years, the average climate spending was at 89.6 trillion per year, or equal 3.9% allocated from the state budget. The state budget have funded 34% of financing needs based on a second biennial update report as issued by the KLHK, which is valued 3,461 trillion, or equal to 266 trillion per year to achieve NDC target in 2030. However, in 2020, the climate spending has been declining. The budget refocusing policies, as I mentioned earlier. This makes our fiscal capacity to fund climate needs is getting even lower. This year, from the 39.6 trillion climate spending, it consists of 55% for mitigation and 45% for adaptation spending. That said, the government of Indonesia needs to mobilize our other climate finance sources outside the state budget to achieve the NDC target. And the next slide show you about some climate finance option that we have and exercised. I believe most of you have known very well about GCF. Maybe the one thing that I need to share with you that recently, I mean, I believe you've been aware or read it in some of the articles that GCF approved Indonesia's proposal on RED Plus amounting to 103.8 million US dollar under result-based payment or RBP scheme. This is the biggest among other countries that already received the RBP from the GCF. And then we are really happy about this. Even the Minister of Finance and the Minister of KLHK, they did the press conference announcing about this achievement, because this is such an acknowledgement to our commitment in addressing climate change. And not only that, for the next slide, you will see that Green Climate Fund Indonesia, like this, from the readiness facilities, the NDA, the government fiscal policy office as NDA already also received a number, some amount of fund, and PT SME as well. Next slide, please. And then, this is other projects that, in Indonesia that already received approval from Green Climate Fund, and we already received the fund in various schemes. For other climate finance that we have are managed by our state-owned enterprises and our public service agency, PT SME. The next slide, you will see that PT SME is a state-owned. They have the Indonesia One, which is a blended finance platform to facilitate climate finance engagement from philanthropic, international donor agencies, aid allocation, green investor, commercial banks, multilateral development banks, and others. As for the Environment Fund Agency, or BLU BPDLH, it was established by the government through the Ministry of Finance, aiming to support conservation and environmental management, biodiversity management, and addressing the impact of climate change. The BLU, the BPDLH, has been operational treasury supervisory. And the next is our climate finance, to be precise, is Minister of Finance climate finance by issuing. We in the Minister of Finance is quite proud of our Green Sukuk. We believe that this is showing our commitment to climate finance. The Green Sukuk is an instrument to finance a national program that's related to climate change action and also support the SDGs target. The climate budget tagging data is used as reference in the issuance of Green Sukuk 18. Based on the Green Sukuk allocation and impact report 2020, the result of Green Sukuk issuance in 2009 an existing project or the refinancing scheme for 51% and finance new project for 49%. So for the next slide, what the innovative climate finance that we could responding to the current global COVID-19 pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, based on the WMO, during this pandemic, the global emission had decreased by 6%. Emission is only, most likely is only a short-term situation. The Natural Climate Change and Global Carbon Project reported that since countries are relaxing lockdown for economic recovery, the CO2 emission levels from have risen despite a drastic decline in March to April 2020. But we are facing two issues here. First, we have to anticipate the return of emission level along with the economic recovery, bearing in mind that Indonesia is still committed to achieving the NDC target in 2030. But then, on the other hand, efforts to recover the national economy also narrowing or limiting the climate change action needs to mobilize funding sources outside the state budget or the PBN, so that efforts to achieve NDC target can be on track. From the next slide, we understand that based on the assessment by this sort of green stimulus index, as can be seen from the next slide, conducted by the Vivid Economics in 2020, the fiscal stimulus provided by still deemed dominated by brown instrument rather than green. The portion of green stimulus in Indonesia is still low if we compare to the green stimulus in China, India, and Brazil. Even when we compare to, if we compare with the European Unions, that's more, I mean, the comparison can be more obviously very big difference. Indonesia, that green stimulus might be something that we can consider and explore. So now we, I mean, at this stage, we focus that the issuance, I think, the issuance of green sukuk is one of the innovative climate change that we already have and further. We are happy to share with you that by our third green sukuk issuance in June 2020, we managed to raise a total $2.75 billion from the 3 global sukuk issuance in 2018. Even at the last issuance in June, it was oversubscribed and booked the lowest coupon rate ever for the 5-year tenure at 2.3%. So we are optimistic that the green sukuk is a potential instrument to be developed climate funding in Indonesia with COVID-19 pandemic. We are using the fund to sector transition, waste to energy and waste management, as well as sustainable transport. This is the last slide as the takeaways. COVID-19 is a threat to the world economy, including Indonesia. Current condition must be mitigated through extraordinary policies and additional stimulus. It is all needed in the context of handling COVID-19 and supporting national economic recovery. The additional support from the budget 2020 for handling COVID-19 and the cost of national economic recovery is changing the state budget posture in 2020 and for the next 3 years, which has a widening budget deficit from the normal threshold at maximum 3% of GDP, currently at 6.34. On the other hand, it is necessary to continuously develop climate change funding innovation to support the achievement of the NDC target in 2030. Therefore, the government needs a framework to provide fiscal policy which may handle the development post-pandemic and green investment as well. Support from all parties is needed so that the government can overcome the impact of COVID-19 while still be able to achieve the NDC target. I think that will be all for me. Thank you, moderator. I over it to you again.
Thank you, Budian, for presenting such important stuff, showing the commitment of government of Indonesia, especially being committed in the finance, some commitment and also a framework that support the climate change finance. Okay, next we have 15 minutes allocated for two discussions. So I invite first Dr. Heiner von Lübke from TIW Germany to give your brief discussion for this presented so far, and then the next 7 minutes to Dr. Budi Setiawan from as well as providing the your perspective. Please, Heiner, your time. 7.5 minutes. Yeah?
Hello, everyone. I'm very thankful for the invitation to this webinar and the organization, Papradono and Padyoko, of course, and I'm very happy to hear and see many familiar faces, above all, of course, Pak Medril, whom I worked with a long time in Indonesia, and several others. So yeah, very grateful to hopefully contribute with some meaningful points in this discussion section. There were actually so many points that I would like to echo in the presentation of Pan Medril about how to build back better. That also reflect my experience that I had working with Indonesia as a climate change policy advisor during past years. I'm back to Germany since a number of years now, but I think with this, let's say, speaks to me because it triggers, let's say, my thoughts and let's say ideas how to address these points. For me, I thought was striking to see the similarities between, let's say, what we are talking about when we speak about climate change and how to address it, and how to build back better from COVID-19. Because it's both about, let's say, the needs for structural changes. One side, climate change, we are speaking always about, let's say, how to introduce structural changes to get away from business as usual scenarios, building back better in the context of COVID, and sustainability requires to undertake structural changes, not to bounce back quickly to a business as usual in economic senses. But also, let's say, to become more resilient as a society, and resilience includes then also to address climate change. So I think how to achieve that, Pan Medril already made some points there. He made reference to, let's say, existence of silos. I think that's very important to overcome these through integrated way of unfolding a narrative, let's say, combining arguments that, let's say, COVID-19 recovery cannot only be about finance and economics. It has to include also, let's say, aspects of sustainability, and these kind of integrated discourses and decision making has to then extend also, I think, to questions of how to make the right policy and finance decisions then to, let's say, build back better than in medium and long term. And I think, and that's kind of me as, let's say, representative or ex-representative, I should rather say, of those guys working with the Indonesian government from the international community, and being, let's say, essentially a foreigner, or how do you say, VNA. And that's, let's say, pointing to the direction of how to deal with the donors supporting initiatives related to building back better. And I think there again, it cannot only be about, let's say, addressing liquidity issues, but it also, let's say, has to tackle some more, let's say, complex questions, how to introduce these structural changes. And I think these discussions with the donors, they have to be led, let's say, on equal footing between Indonesia and the donors, let's say, and speak about those instruments, and let's say that are not only addressing the liquidity issue, but also include, let's say, policy advice, let's say, probably also innovative ideas how to support these initiatives that were actually eloquently presented already by Pan Medril and representatives of Ministry of Finance, the BKF. And so, yeah, instead of, let's say, making too many concrete suggestions how these, let's say, donor supports can look like, I think our task as a project here is also to come up with, let's say, policy briefs, research, where we would like to tackle these questions, how international climate finance can be combined with initiatives such as building back better. And therefore, I'm really looking forward to, let's say, questions. I'm more a type of person who is, let's say, happy when I can engage in discussions, discussing ideas, etc. So I'm really looking forward to to receive also some challenging questions to ask. Yeah, very happy for that. I think I was staying within my time limit, as otherwise Professor Pradono would have alerted me. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Pak Haidar, for your comments. And next, Pak Budi, please, was 7 minutes.
Thank you. I just have 5 minutes. 7 minutes already, 10 minutes already taken by Hannah. Okay. As Pak Joko mentioned in the first discussion, that this study is will be compared with several countries, and then the same. This study also we have to compare what the policy addressing to respond the COVID, I mean to respond the NDC during the COVID. I mean, Pak Matthew already mentioned the Build Back Better, as Hannah mentioned before. So we will use the same framework usually as Stan mentioned before. That means timely, targeted, temporary, and transformative. This what we need to take more detailed information from to our to director who step here. And in our experience, when we study on RADD or the green sukuk, this is from the process. In example, RADD, this is take very long time, Pak. Maybe Bapak know better than me. Long time. Then we finally got financing for the research-based payment. So when we propose the Build Back Better, in your opinion, how long, Pak, we will starting to get the financing for international climate? So because we are in the limited time, Budian mentioned that means in the 3 years, the APBN, our APBN will focusing on economic recovery. Yeah, that's the point. So how we can do the accelerate implementation or Build Back Better? In example, in ministry. As you also mentioned, Pak Medil mentioned that in 2020, 2021 in APBN, we only have very limited activity related to our SDI target. So that means how to increase this activity in the future. Yeah, this is my impression from Pak Medil presentation. And the interesting is from Ibu Dian. Yeah, Ibu mentioned about the green sukuk, one of the tools. Yeah, we found that green sukuk, if we have the commitment, and then we can use the green sukuk to finance. Yeah, and here we look the temporary. Where Ibu mentioned Perpres 54 related to the payment, and that means we have rule to let's talk to increase fiscal policy to do something and the truth. So when Ibu mentioned this green sukuk is one part of the financing to achieve the energy target. This is related to the Perpres 44 because Ibu mentioned will be have deficit APBN on the 3 years. So or probably Ministry of Finance has others. Yeah, because when Ibu talk with the climate change fiscal framework, is still in study, Bu. Yeah, please, if I'm not mistaken, that means this year we're not ready to find how to financing. Yeah, that's the discussion, because in quick the question and answer also many questions. Our financing for highway is still high if you compare to our target on this year. My question. Thank you. Thank you, Pak Prad.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for Pak Budi for the comment and discussion. Next, we come to our session of question and answers sessions. There are some questions already written in the Q&A column, but also we provide a chance for those who would like to have live questions in this corner. So Anybody from this group would like to propose a live question before I read the written question?
Probably from the Q&A first, Pak. Because
If no, then we would like to read some questions written in the Q&A.
Pak Pradono, if I may respond to the questions from Pak Budi.
Yeah, okay, then after that, some questions also direct to Pak Medrisam written in the Q&A. So please, you may first answer the question from Pak Budi and also Aidan. Okay, please, Pak Medrisam.
Thank you very much. Probably this response also align with Pak Heidner's questions actually. As I mentioned before, that in this year we have experienced a turbulence in our development programs, and this year is a big shock for our development program, because most of the budget allocations dedicated to a lot of development targets have been shifted to our COVID-19 impact recovery, and so that's why our president stated very firmly that this is a consolidated year. So that means that we need to sit back again, to think again how then we should accelerate our development path after or during the recovery program of our COVID-19. But of course, this cannot be done this year, because this year actually dedicated to mostly about how we tackle the disasters, this crisis immediately. But the start from 2021, basically, I have already mentioned that we start to revive. But of course, if we are talking about 2021 programs, actually we have to finalize it this year. Actually, in a few months, in the next coming few months, actually. So that's why then it is a bit difficult if we design the full package of our green fiscal stimulus this year to respond to 2021. So that's why for 2022, basically we have to design our planning document, our budget in November or December. So yes, usually T-2 actually. The time is T-2 to define or to design the budget, the program, and so on. So basically, so that's why then, as I mentioned in my presentations, that we are together with BKF as well, Menko Perekonomian, Coordinating Ministry for Economy. Three of us actually start to map out again the source of financings for low carbon development from 2018 to 2021 actually. We want to see how much actually budget allocations from 2018 to 2019 or 2020 in particular. This is just to see how much actually the budget government spendings, not only from line ministries, but also from subsidy, tax, and so on and so forth. So then we will see how much this COVID-19 actually impacted to the budget of 2021. So then we will see. So from that exercise, basically this exercise will be ended in this month. So in early next month, we start we will inform to the public about our first exercise. Actually, the map, probably mapping financing maps, financial maps of low carbon development 1.0 probably, because we need to do more detailed exercise with the line ministries. So from that exercise, we try to design our fiscal stimulus package for 2022. So once we know our maps, our existing financing structures of our development programs related to low carbon development, so then we start to design with the line ministries about what are we going to do next basically after during the preparations of fiscal year in 2022. So yeah, that's the sequence that we start to aim for. But of course, we have our own hypothesis, and actually we want to improve our budget allocations for low carbon development. And as people might be aware as well, of course, government state budget cannot cover all financial requirements to do all these low carbon development initiatives. So that's why we need to collaborate with the private sectors, with the international partners, with NGOs. So all of resources that we have to collect and stream together, integrate, synergize together to reach the ambitious target of our emission reduction, our intensity emission reduction target as well. That's probably the response, Pak. And yeah, we have to work together, Pak Heiner. And this is we cannot just do it in partial mode or in a silo mode. Yeah, and so that's why three of us, BKF, Bapenas, and also Ministry of Economy, actually we work together to try to accomplish this well, complex task actually, as you might be aware, Pak Heiner. Okay, hand it over to you back again.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Pak Medrisal. Sorry. Would you like to directly? Oh yeah. I give a chance to Ibu Dian to provide.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Maybe only briefly to add up the points that already given by Pak Medrisal. So yeah, it's true that I mean we have to collaborate and synergize with other related parties to during this situation, because the time again for us to do the everything silo. So on the challenge for saying, yes, Pak Budi, it's true that we have a very huge challenge due to our limited fiscal space. We are projecting that this situation, I mean, we just can apply the exit strategies at least by 2023. So I mean, we are trying to stage down every year to lead to the normal threshold of deficit financing as 3%. Currently, we are working very hard to make the stimulus effective, by speed up the process, redesign the programs, review the program, and even redesign the bureaucratic process. But then we understand that cannot do that only at the national level. So that's why we are also seeking the collaboration and the solution and the synergy or collaboration, because the demand side and the supply side cannot be addressed only at the national level, because this global supply chain, we have to get everything settled, not only at our national boundaries. I think I need also to inform you, I mean, that the government attempts to get only by issuing the green sukuk. I believe you understand that we have other sources for the government which come from the MDB's financial assistance. And the interesting thing that I can share with you today is some of the financing, some of the loan, I can say that we try to get the MDBs, some of the environmental related. I take the example of our currently ongoing financial operation that we are working on with the ADB is for the contingent disaster. That's a program loan, actually, part of the financing and the loan that we access to finance the current budget deficit. But then the way the loan is packaged, it's also a policy that become the underlying. The loan is mostly environmental related and disaster management related. So in this case, we are also in cooperation with Bappenas and Ministry of KLHK and then Ministry of even the social health and because it not only cover the natural disaster but the non disaster like pandemic, but then one of the underlying program or the structural reform that we put it as our commitment to the loan is to improve disaster resilience and climate change adaptation policy making and coordination that already stated in our medium-term development plan. But then we commit to better track climate change investment spending and general financial management by government to be upgraded. So the government put some of the commitments as the structural reform as the requirement of this loan. So this is this kind of financing, not only not only merely for the sake to finance our budget, but we already make it to in line with our target of an agenda to address the disaster financing and also climate change. This is on the only point that I'd like to add up, moderator. Thank you.
Thanks, Ibu Dian, and also Pak Ahmed. So based on the answers of Pak Ahmed and Ibu Dian, it seems that we have packages that is implemented. What is called? We have a kind of time lag, yeah, and this because of budget cycles. So I would like to confirm to Professor Bastian. You mentioned that Europe are already having virus recovery plan, yeah, to have lower emissions. What about time lag? Is there any similar time lag implementation such as in Indonesia? Could you provide some?
That's a really good question. So we had the first phase of the liquidity programs in Germany and through the EIB that have been implemented within month in Germany and several months at the European level, the credit lines to member states. And this first set of programs, they were, as your Indonesian programs, very much general. So any business could apply for, you would kind of not have very many strings attached. We had some debates in this case in terms of restructuring requirements in terms of airlines when they were bailed out. France, for example, put in some requirements but Air Force changed their overall strategy and not kind of deliver short distance flights anymore. But otherwise, there was not very much climate attached to this. So the programs that I was reporting about now are the ones that the national program is starting now this fall. As a research institution now, we are requested to start to submit proposals to spend money this year. And you suddenly realize how tough this is on the short term. But the European programs are still in the final decision process. So I would expect most of the funding then to kind of start from the 1st of January next year, which also is the timeline for the next EU budget. And I think this is important to have this clarity already now, because it is for a lot of businesses, they again, if they know that there's the budget and there's opportunities to apply for funding, then they internally have to make the project, kind of make the planning, the applications and so on. So they need early clarity, even so the spending will probably only start sometimes throughout next year. And so that is perhaps a bit of a question coming back to your conversations is what kind of instruments are there for national and international investors that allow them to see early on already the direction of your recovery program. Obviously, the spending will be a bit later, but having indicators for that already that allow companies to kind of dedicate their strategy towards transformative activities that have additional economic benefits and job benefits.
That's a perspective from Europe and implementation. Yeah, I think that's our first discussion about that one. And next we have some written questions in the Q&A. Maybe this one mostly directed to Menteri Sabri as well, yeah, and maybe Ibu Dian also later. Yeah, first, the question is about asking about the seriousness of LCDI implementation, because in the project implemented, it seems that bias to activities that what is called may later give a worsening climates. Yeah, for example, bias toward private transportation projects, such as all road projects, as compared to public transportation. And it is also related with yeah, also by for example train projects, that is more public project, also having less commitment in funding as compared to that toll road. That's the first question. And then the second question is maybe it is related to Ibu Jian, with the current problems of funding related to COVID-19. What is the chance to commit to our NDC 29% and 41% in 2030? This is related directed to Ibu Jian. How optimistic yeah with the target because of our situation now. And back to Pak Betlisam, next question is whether this LCDI initiative is in the mitigation aspects or both with adaptation aspect as well. Question. That the first question. Maybe later we will summarize it. Is Pak Betlisam, and then you can respond to this question.
Also, there is a question on green transport.
Yeah. Green, yeah, but green transportation. Yeah, maybe you can relate it to that one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the questions related to all these LCDI issues. First of all, I have to address this question related to seriousness of the governments to support the local development.
Serious.
Of course, yeah. The government actually, if you read our midterm development planning for 2020-2024, low carbon development has been put as a program priority under priority 6 of our national development program. So basically, the government has already big commitment to, and we are very serious actually with this low carbon development. It's not only to achieve our Paris Agreement targets, but only with low carbon development, we would like to align of our most of our development goals to be aligned with our sustainable development goals as well, including our emission targets, of course. So basically, if you might be aware, actually our exercise in 29%, 41% actually has been produced by the concept of low carbon development, actually a systems approach and so on. So probably several of you have already involved in that preparations in 2015, if I'm mistaken, when we did our emission reduction targets. And with this low carbon development initiative, we also add one more indicators. So later we will not only be talking about emission reductions, but we also be talking about our intensity emission reductions, emission intensity reductions. So we try to combine our emissions reduction efforts with our economic efforts as well. So we would like, so in this case, we want to align all our big targets, our development targets together. So, and this is, if you read our annual development programs, emission reduction has been put as a macro indicators target as well. So it's not only about growth, economic growth, our Gini ratio or employment, but now emission reduction target has been put parallel as a main indicators of our macro developments. So it's already now it's been put as a top priority in our development targets. And when we go into operational aspects with related to sectors, something like transports, energy, and also forests, peats, and so on. So I would like to respond here that basically the government has already allocated funds for all low carbon development sectors or programs, something like transports. Of course, toll road is not part of our low carbon development initiative, but when we subsidize our tickets for public transport to shift from private vehicles to public transports, actually that's a big allocations budget from the central government to push the agenda of public transport actually. And right now we are still doing our exercise to see how much that the subsidy or something like an incentive to 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 speed up our electric mobile construction or developments, because we know that we have already our presidential regulations for electrical car, but then of course right now we have to see how much then the incentive that we have to provide for this electrical car next year and also in the next fiscal year as well. So basically in the green transports we have a lot of programs in particular related to the public transports, the shifting from public cars to public transports. And what else? And okay, and also related to um, the 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 chance of the Indonesia to reach our ambitious targets in 29% and also 41% in 2030. Basically, the figure actually I myself actually the one who one of the modelers actually to design this 29%. Actually, this 29% figures did not come from the sky. Actually, we calculated this 29% targets based on the policies that the government has already designed, start from 2015 to and also to continue to 2030. And we believe actually there will be many questions related to how that these policies actually something like reforestations, avoiding deforestation, mangrove and peatland restoration, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and you name it, and how then all those policies is impacted by the COVID-19. So yes, that's a very valid questions actually. So that's why then in this fiscal year and in the next year, you can see that we will not be there will not be a lot of actions probably on those activities, but we still concentrate on pandemic COVID-19 programs. But as I mentioned in 2022, so we start to we start to revive all these programs, and we push this harder to be implemented. And so that's why in 2022, actually, we are still in discussion on this. We would like to put low carbon development as the main themes of our annual development plan for 2022. So start from 2022. Actually, we would like to revive all of this, and of course, this because there's only 3 years 20 cabinet. So I believe there will be something like a review of our current RPGMN in 2022. So that's why we will revive again the targets for 2024, but still we keep maintaining our ambitious target in 2030 for 29% and with our own resources and 41% with support from the international partners. So I know that sometimes this is a very ambitious effort, but well, we have to be ambitious. Otherwise, there will be no, accelerations in our climate change or low carbon development initiative. Some people also asking me about how come then there will be a big jump from 9% of energy mix to 23% of energy mix of renewable energy in energy mix in 2025. Well, of course, yeah, people think that might be impossible, but we have to try. And the government have already a big commitment to implement the renewable energy and also energy conservations. But of course, this has to be seen as a big transitions from 2020 to the 2030. So there are a lot of things that we have to do, that we have to do it together with privates, with local governments, with NGOs and international communities as well. But we still be optimistic to reach out all these targets. And since we will be working together, so I will be not very pessimistic to achieve all those targets. Over back to you again, Pak Pradul.
Yeah, thank you, Pak. Yeah, I'd like also to respond to the question. I mean, with the current pandemic situation, what is the chance to pursue our commitment for to achieve the NDC? So for us, the same here. I mean, we also, I mean, still optimistic about the chance. Now the chance is there. Now it's only about the creativity and the ability to see the opportunities out there. Because now, as I mentioned in my presentation, that now the government is very realistic. We cannot only rely on the public finance or only limit ourselves with the resources within our boundaries. Though we are trying to also optimize our national private sector to be able to participate in many projects and programs related to climate change or green environmental related projects and programs. But then we are also, trying to optimize the international cooperation by, as we mentioned, by engaging more and taking more opportunities from a green climate fund and the global environment facilities, and also some financial facilities from the multilateral development banks. But let me give you the one of the example about our innovation in tapping and collecting resources and manage it in a way that make our budget is more sustainable and optimizing various resources that we possible gap. So I'm talking about our BLU, Badan Layanan Umum, or our public service agency managing our environment fund. We call it Badan Pengelola Dana Lingkungan Hidup. I believe some of you or most of you we've been familiar with this institution. That's a BLU or public service agency structurally under finance, supervised by our DG Treasury. So I'd like to invite my senior analyst, Pak Nur, to give you some explanation or information about how this public service agency manage its fund in not only in the endowment form, but then also how they get the trust fund and other financial resources for their financing. Mas Nur, silakan Mas Nur.
Yes, thank you, Bu Dian, and dear our colleagues, Pak Medrizam, Pak Prof. Joko, and some others, Mas Budi, etc. Thanks for the opportunity. Just like what Ibu Dian already mentioned, that there are some possible innovative financing that are currently under the Ministry of Finance initiative. The first is That's like Pudian already mentioned about the green sukuk is one of the innovation that Ministry of Finance already pursue, and it's already recognized by international fora and communities. And the second is also that the Fiscal Policy Agency is the NDA of the CGCF, and just like already mentioned by Bu Dian, that we've got a commitment from the GCF to support the RED Plus via our vehicle or PLU named PPDLH Environmental Funds. This PLU actually is mandated to manage the fund that's dedicated for the environment, and it is expected that this PLU will also provide some more innovation in terms of supporting for the environment, including but not limited, according to the presidential regulation, is also can provide some subsidy, can also provide some revolving fund, as well as also intervention in the carbon market once the market is already there. Then it is expected that this fund or this vehicle may provide quite a long-term support, and so far it's also may combine the initiative not just from the domestic resources, but it's also expected to be also may channel the international fund. Just like what already mentioned, we have the RED Plus initiatives that the LOI will be also channeled through the PPDLH as well as the GCF for the RED Plus, and the PPDLH in cooperation with the KLHK has a couple of initiatives with regard to the RED Plus, also FCPF as well as the biocarbon fund. So we quite positive with the PPDLH, and it is expected that the vehicle may also enable us in providing some innovative financing in the future, particularly for the environment. Thank you. Thank you.
Enough, Ibu Ian? Yes. Okay. Thanks for the discussion. I think there is still some question written in the Q&A, but maybe already covered in the answers of the yeah. For example, one question, the coverage, is it also covering the mitigation and adaptation, or only one part of that one? Maybe somebody could answer this one. Better. There is a question on it, whether the program is only covering in the mitigation stage or would also at adaptation stage. Could you provide this one?
Putus-putus, Pak, nggak kedengeran.
Okay. Yeah. Another question is about asking whether the stimulus and packaging for this climate change is after COVID is covering mitigation and adaptation, or only one of them, say for example mitigation only. Anybody could you provide this?
Okay, if I can respond these questions correctly, please inform me if I not respond this straight away. But if I'm not mistaken, the questions related to the difference between the low carbon and also the climate resilience related activities in RPGMNs. If I could answer this straight away, actually low carbon development initiatives mostly related to our mitigation actions. So we try to respond our NDC's targets that we have already committed in Paris agreements through our low carbon development. So we're still aiming for 29% emission reduction targets, but we also align those that emissions targets with also our internal economics targets as well. So we don't want to see that our economy declining because of we have to do these emission reductions. So both target has to there will be no trade-off between the two. So, and related to the climate resilience targets, we can say that this is almost in line with our adaptations programs. We don't have any clear targets that we have already committed to Paris agreements on adaptations, but we're in Indonesia, we start to do this climate resilience programs with our own indicators we have already set in our RPGMNs. Actually, we use our loss and damage indicators in RPGMN. And if you see that in the current RPGMN, our climate resilience indicators actually links to the reductions of potential loss of our GDP due to the impact of climate change. So that's the indicator. So the loss of the reductions of the loss of the GDP, sorry. In our RPGMN, we have already calculated how much the potential reductions that we have already designed so far using our policies, and you can see it in our current RPGMN. Probably, and also there's a questions related to the interest of the policymakers on issues related to the climate change. This is a very interesting questions actually. As I mentioned, today probably most of our decision makers are busy and puzzled with how then we anticipate and respond all these COVID-19's positive cases that still increasing in Indonesia. So, but that's not our problems. That's the health issues, and it's not related to the low carbons. But of course, we have to convince our decision makers that low carbon developments is still in the heart of our development agenda. Because of what? Because of we just cannot think our development just in a short-term way. We have to think our development more in a medium or more in a long-term way. So that's why we propose Build Back Better with Low Carbon Development is the new agenda in the 2022. So, and basically we are still doing some exercise to prove that low carbon development initiative basically will produce a more bigger opportunity for employment. So basically we are now working together with from the German side, with the GIZ, and also with UN, with ILO, and my ministers right now also become representative of Asia Pacific, if I'm not mistaken, for climate job for initiatives. So basically, we are still doing some exercise to measure how much the green jobs that we can produce using this low carbon development initiative. So by proving this, that low carbon development initiative can provide more jobs, we really expect that this could get paid attention by our decision makers. When we talk about COVID-19, of course, jobs is a big issue. So that's why we have to provide some solutions, and we believe low carbon development initiative can provide solutions with green jobs that can be produced from all its activities. Probably that's my response, Pak Pradono. Over back to you.
Thanks, Pak Idrisam. Any final remark from Budian before we close this session? No?
I saw Jerry Lim raise the hand. I don't know.
Good. Nobody raised the hand, I guess. Okay, with that, I would like to close this session, and I didn't want to conclude, but allow me to underline some points. Yeah, first that as is shown by Professor Carsten, he has shown how clear and the strategy of recovery plan in Europe that helping lower emissions. That's very interesting. And also from Pak Metrizam, we have what is called. We have been brought to the concept of LCDI to BBB, towards resilient and sustainable futures in Indonesia, and from Indonesia and also more we have been introduced with the climate change fiscal framework with optimism for the future and using the competitive finance to overcome and to take our climate change commitment after COVID. So detail of this one will be recorded as well as written by fellow administrators. And so with that, I would like to close the session. Thanks for panelists and discussants and everybody for these webinars. And I give the turn to Mas to have a closing.
All right.
Probably
Professor
before Dimas, I just first would like to thanks all the participants. I think now is still 76, yeah, around 20 just left. The composition of the participant from the comprising from line ministries, provincial governments, city and regency government, as well as NGO, private sector, and student. Yeah, even there is one participant from BPK. And then secondly, I would like to thank Pak Medril, Budian, and Pak Nur. Yeah, really appreciate. I hope Pak Medril and Budian still could have again one more to be speakers for our second talk on adaptation. And then also thanks again for Professor Carsten and Pak Heiner. And then also all the CCC team, Pak Fitri, Sita, Fitria, and Dimas. Yeah, I'd like to give you back to Dimas.
All right then. So once again, I would like to express our gratitude towards our distinguished panelists, discussants, and the moderators for the interesting presentation and discussions. Now we can proceed to the photo session of panelists and discussants. Could you please turn on your camera, please? And then I think Pak Fitri will capture us all. Has it been done, or do we need more time?
Are we keeping sufficient distance here?
Yeah, indeed. All right, so I think.
Yeah, one more.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So, okay, yeah. Thank you, Pak Fitri. So before closing this webinar, I would like to remind all participants to fill out the attendance form, whose link is shared in the chat box. All right, so that was the first Climate Policy and Finance talk hosted by the Climate Change Center of Institut Teknologi Bandung. We thank for the participation from all panelists, discussants, and participants, and we certainly hope that you enjoyed the discussion. For the presentation, slides, and certificates, we will email it to you in 1 week. So thank you for your participation and see you in the next Climate Policy and Finance talk. Good afternoon.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Pak Joko.
Ya, makasih. Ya, Ener, thanks.
Pamit dulu Pak. Ya. Dan pamit Pak Joko dan teman-teman.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Nur.
Assalamualaikum.
Oh, ya betul Mas.
Oke, monggo Pak.
Ketemu lagi.
Oke. Ya. Ya, gimana Pak? Jadi tadi ada berapa tadi ya? Saya short secara ini
121 lebih rasanya yang tertinggi.
dari 100 turun jadi 84 ditambah 27 yang YouTube.
Oh.
Nah, yang daftar yang saya share di di WA group itu yang dari Zoom aja itu. Maksudnya yang terdaftar ya. Daftar. Lumayan banyak yang dari universitas, termasuk yang sampai SMA segala juga. Surprise juga itu. Terus yang
konsep lingkungan itu dan di SMA juga udah jadi pelajaran gitu.
Yang surprise lagi itu dari ini Bremen University, itu nggak tahu dari apa. Dapatnya terus British Embassy.
Mungkin nggak tahu dari mana.
Saya nggak tahu ya, apa di saya atau di Pak Prat ya. Saya ngelihat apa dengernya nggak ini ya. Yang
saya ya, akunya
ya.
Nggak tahu teman-teman gimana dengar yang Pak Prat.
Ya Pak Prat mah agak pecah masalahnya.
Oh, padahal saya itu udah
naik tuh.
Saya angkat pindah komputernya, nanti komputernya yang jelek.
Iya Pak.
Saya kira karena ruangannya di lain gitu ya. Saya coba mendekat, ternyata masih nggak terlalu ini ya. Berarti komputernya nih kayaknya.
Harus pakai mic Pak. Harus pakai mic atau apa headset kayak Pak Fitri gitu Pak.
Iya.
Oh, ya mungkin ya. Ya mungkin kayak gitu ya. Ini komputer baru ini Mas.
Lebih murah beli mic Pak. Kecuali memang mau beli komputer.
Harus beli lagi. Iya sih. Ya. Next yang ya berikutnya. Yang tanggal
lagi ya adaptasi ya. Ini Pak Medril segera kita itu aja.
Ini pesertanya nggak bisa dikeluarin Pak.
Oh iya nih Bu.
Ini mulai satu-satu berapa nih? 37 ya? 35.
Bentar.
Keluarin aja Pak.
Ya, terima kasih untuk para partisipan. Masih 31.
Kita mungkin bisa ya. Saya belum bisa.
Cuman bisa.
Jadi
Bisa harusnya co-host tuh bisa mengeluarkan co-host juga.
Ya, caranya itu, caranya belum tahu.
Di sebelah namanya Pak.
Oh, satu-satu.
Iya, saya remote satu-satu.
Oh, satu-satu.
Ada pindah keluar tadi.
Udah tinggal dikit tinggal.
17, 16, 14, 10. Nah, tinggal 10. Kita aja yang 10.
Tinggal.
Iya sudah. Satu lagi.
Oke.
Mas Ridho.
Ya.
Kok itu? Oh, oke, ya. Sip.
Ini berikutnya gimana? Pak, itu Pak Dadang ya?
Nah, Pak Dadang nih
2 minggu.
2 minggu lagi, tapi mungkin mulai besok harus intensif juga, apa?
Saya
mengenai tema dari
book dulu Pak Medril. Tadi itu ada yang Mbak Putri.
Kita mengundang custom lagi juga.
Kayaknya yang itu Indonesia deh, apa?
Oh,
ya.
Karena ini apa yang dibahas betul-betul ini
betul Indonesia.
dan dalam. Tadi kan Pak Medril udah bilang apa dari sisi beliau yakin banget udah lengkap ukurannya kan. Padahal kalau dari sisi kita ya masih banyak kita pertanyakan. Itu kan tadi pakai GDP apa loss and damage segala macam. Gimana ya? Itu kita diskusikan. Makanya ya beliau saya harapkan ada. Tapi di ketiga beliau ganti Bu Emma. Bisa satu panggung.
Yang kedua Richard sama siapa? Yang lainnya?
Ya mungkin dari keuangan perlu lagi ya mungkin ya. Karena itu link juga.
Ya.